Enneagram. I'm your host, Jason Miller, and I'm here with
your co-host, Ben Schrady. And we want you to know that we're going to be taking your questions live this morning. So go ahead, leave them in the comments below, and we'll address them. Well, you'll address them. I will ask them.
Well, and we'll have dialogue. So today is actually going to be a little bit different. We've had a lot of questions coming in, and so yes, we're still going to continue to have guests and people that we interview, but we're also going to do times where we just talk about what the Enneagram is and where things are with it and answer questions that you have. Today, we're going to be looking at the vices, virtues, and fruits of each type. Now, I also want to give you a heads up that today is our last episode for season 1. We're going to take a little hiatus, and in that time, we're going to be planning and bringing new guests on. And so we're super excited for season 2, so be on the lookout for that. So I want to start off and talk about why it's important to understand the shadow side, what the vices or sins are, what each type leans to, because as you look at each personality type, they have elements that they'll lean into. And the language at times can be confusing, and you'll see when we talk about it specifically, for instance, for the 8, we're going to be starting with 8s because they are the beginning of the gut triad. So we're not picking on 8s. I've heard this like, why do 8s always go first? But here's the downside. That means 7s always go last. So we start off with 8s just because they are the beginning of the gut triad, and we kind of work our way through. So just like the stereotypes or the name that we attach to each of the Enneagram types, the language around it can be confusing. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things, the hesitations that I get from people when we're walking through is we'll talk about the shadow type, and I'll use the 8 as an example. The 8 is sometimes called the protector or challenger. Now, some books have it purely as the challenger, and immediately I have friends who are 8s who are like, why am I the challenger?
No, I'm not a challenger.
I'm not a challenger. And it's not that that's all they are. They can also be protective. But here's where we can see sometimes the confusion around words. So with the Enneagram was not specifically Christian, right? We know that it could be anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 years old. It's only been in modern times that we overlaid what we call modern typology or psychological personality theories, similar to Myers-Briggs, Strength Finders, DISC, or any of those. But we see that there's some evidence that the early desert fathers, and I'm talking 1,700 years ago, overlaid the fruit of the Spirit as well as the 7 deadly sins plus 2 on each side. And so when we look at, we're going to start with the sin or the vices of each type, you're going to see the language could be really misconstrued. And so let's look at the first one. So the sin or the vice or fixation, depending on what you want to call it, of the 8 is lust. Now, when you think of lust,
Now, hold on. Yeah.
When we think of lust, immediately what comes to mind is sex.
Correct.
But that's not what lust means. Here, the idea of lust is a lust for power, for control. And the 8s, remember, 8s are protectors. Their gut instinct is to move into, I need to control things. And yes, all the numbers can deal with lust. I mean, that's not specifically like if you're an 8, that's the only sin you deal with.
Or you can only lust if you're an 8.
Or you can only, every number can deal with any type of sin. But they put the value of lust or kind of that construct of lust because they lust for control. They look for opportunities to have power. And there's a reason for it, which brings us to the next part, what they're avoiding. Now, for 8s, what they want to avoid is coming across as weak. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be seen as weak. They don't want to be controlled. And they struggle with vulnerability. Now, that doesn't mean that all 8s aren't vulnerable with people or that all 8s are over-controlling. As a matter of fact, the more healthy an 8 is, the less they need to control stuff or they leverage their power, so to speak. But that avoidance that's what they're trying to avoid. And every number, just like they have a sin, they have an avoidance. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. So when that goes from there, we then go into what we call the pitfalls. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time just fixating on one number because all of us have strengths and weaknesses, right?
Yep.
And often we're really good about talking about the bad stuff.
Yeah, the conversation almost always lends itself to this is the worst thing about any number. But no, each number has a wonderful, unique strength to it as well.
Yeah. And that goes back to remembering our personality is a gift, right? Our personality, and the problem with all gifts is that when you forget that the goal is about the giver of the gift, not the gift itself,
Correct.
that gift can become a curse. And when we lean too much into our personality, all of a sudden what starts off becoming a strength can actually become a weakness or a prison. And so for 8s, the reason why they love to control is they're very powerful people. I mean, you can feel the presence of an 8 in a room. It's intense. There's an intensity to them. One of my favorite quotes is, 8s aren't as angry as the same, but they are as mean. And the meanness is not this idea that they're jerks about it.
Yeah,
it's
they
just
have this connotation of being a bully, which isn't true.
No.
Can be true, but anyone can be a bully.
That's right.
Yeah.
Any number can do that. And sometimes that smoldering intensity, for people that don't understand it, they'll feel threatened by it. Now, again, like you said, all numbers can be bullies.
Yeah.
That's not limited to just an 8. Everything, when unhealthy, can lean towards other things. But the pitfall of the 8, when they go into that sin side or that dark side, is they move into the 5. That's where the 8 goes into stress. And in that time, they start planning, and it's revenge, but maybe not the revenge of, like, we're not talking Liam Neeson revenge here. Like,
I have a particular set of skills.
yeah, we're not talking that kind of revenge. It's more of they begin to build cases to get power back. And because, I mean, that's like saying only 8s seek revenge. No, trust me, and any number can do that. I've had moments in that where someone has wronged me and I'm like, what can I do to get back at them, right?
Yeah.
That's not a strictly 8 thing. But going back to that sin, that dark side, that fixation, is they'll start moving into the 5 in stress. And if they're not aware, they'll begin to build cases to get back control. And that's why they call it a pitfall. And every number has those. Now let's get to the bright side, because that's really, I think it's important that we have to deal with both, right? And this isn't like Star Wars where the light side and the dark side. We're really talking about everything has a strength and everything has a weakness, but when you overlay it with the gospel, God gave you your personality for a reason, because you are meant to be a reflection of Him in the world. And the virtue of the 8, and now this is so critical to understand.
Yeah.
For an 8, what they're longing for, somewhere along the way, the story they believed that revealed their personality was that the world is not safe, and I need to protect myself and protect others.
I think I've read it somewhere where it was like they seek innocence because they were robbed of innocence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what ends up happening, and it's so funny, I was talking with Dr. Hall. If you're not from Zion or don't know Dr. Hall, he's a lead pastor here at Zion. Yep. And I was actually watching one time, and it was really funny when we brought this up. He was in a conversation with somebody, and it was pretty intense. And all of a sudden, this little kid comes down, and it's like the gears switched.
Yeah.
And instantly, he went from intense to this gentle kindness.
Okay. My wife, Molly, also an 8. We were just rough and tumble. We were in an argument, going back and forth. We were yelling, and she gets a phone call.
You get in arguments?
I do.
I didn't know that happened. Okay.
I do. No. I win arguments. Whether or not I'm actually the winner, I won. That's my thing. No, but we were in this argument, and we're fighting back and forth, and then her phone rings, and she picks it up and goes, "Hi, this is Molly." And I got so mad. I was like, "How? How could you?" Like, if I were getting a phone call in the middle of something, I'm like, put the phone down, keep going. But she somehow was able to pick it up, and it was a total shift.
Yeah.
A total shift.
And so
she wasn't fighting with them.
And if you look at the 8, what the 8 is longing for, and this is why we need 8s in the world, 8s are a reminder that our world is broken, but it wasn't always that way.
Yeah.
That the world was once a safe place, and that before sin came in, there was innocence. And so 8s actually want to get back to that innocence, to where they actually don't want to be in control. They feel they have to be. And that's kind of the difference. Now, again, we're talking about levels of health. Someone who's an unhealthy 8 or an unhealthy 5 or whatever, an unhealthy 8 will say, I need control. But the more self-aware an 8 becomes, they realize that the reason why they want control is because they really want the world to get to a place where you don't need control.
Yeah.
And that's when there's no conflict, when there are no bullies in the world. 8s are the ones who tend to stand up to bullies.
Yep.
Which then leads us to the fruit of the Spirit. Now, the fruit of the Spirit, it says goodness, and what does that mean? Well, think of goodness in the sense of when an 8 is the fruit that they're reflecting, when there's no conflict, when there's no threat, everything is just good. Mm-hmm. And that's what 8s want. They're longing for that place where everything is just good. And when 8s are bringing the beauty, because the 8s go to the 2 in security, they want to help people. And they're doing it from that place of the goodness of their heart, out of that desire because they love and protect.
Yeah.
And that protection is, no, I want to help you. And so when you're looking, if you're an 8 or if you think you might be an 8, one of the ways to tell is, one, to think about, is anger. Are you someone who struggles with anger? And again, every number can deal with anger. But for 8s, they're part of that anger emotional triad, right?
Yep.
But where is that?
It's almost like there's an undertow of anger.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's always that subtle, that anger just kind of runs, that theme runs through for the 8, 9, and 1, just in different ways, right?
I think of Inside Out, where they've got joy, sadness, and anger. And what's interesting is when you're watching the movie, you can always tell, they have a certain emotion that's in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And so, for the bus driver, they were just all anger. But it was one of those where, it was interesting looking at, for the mom, sadness was in control.
Yeah.
For Riley, joy was in control. For the dad, anger was in control. And I think that's kind of I don't, if that helps at all. That's kind of a way to think about it. Who's in the driver's seat of your emotion.
And for 8, 9s, and 1s, anger is always in the driver's seat, but just in different ways.
Yep.
And for 2, 3s, and 4s, sadness or envy or shame is in the driver's seat. For 7, 6s, and 5s, it's fear is in the driver's seat in different ways, right? And so for when 8s, the beauty that 8s bring to the world is they remind us that there is an innocence that we need to get back to. I mean, if you go to the Bible, and again, we're Christians, so for us, we approach the Enneagram through a Christian lens.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. If I'm an 8 and I'm listening, how can I use this for spiritual formation?
Yeah, and that's a big question. So part of the thing that the 8 can be reminded of is 8s, because they're afraid to be vulnerable at times, they're afraid of weakness. Weakness and meekness are not the same thing. Mm. And for an 8 to submit themselves, to open themselves up, to trust others, because there's that fear of betrayal for the 8.
Yeah.
The gospel reminds us, first of all, we're all sinners in need of Jesus. And even when I became a Christian, guess what? I'm still a sinner in need of Jesus.
Yeah.
And what each number can do is sometimes they forget that they're just as guilty of the thing that they think other people do.
Well, I think it, the thing that you think the most of someone else is usually because that's what you've got. So, for me, I'm thinking that that these people are just looking for the next thing or whatever. No, and that's kind of one of the nice things in when we're talking about compassion and understanding and when there is confrontation with a spouse, with a friend, with something. Yeah. Getting down to this and realizing, no, not everyone's wired the same, which we say, but we don't.
Yeah.
But just realizing, no, they've got a totally different motivation, and I seek to understand what that motivation is, so I know best to love, best to serve them.
And part of what the Enneagram does is it gives us compassion for ourselves, but also others. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not an 8. But when I understand that the story the 8 believes, and this is the underlying story that's always there, is that the world is not safe, and I've been put here to protect. Yep. And to protect means I can't be vulnerable because I could be hurt or other people could be hurt. That's a hard story to live with.
Yeah.
And we all have these stories
we tell.
It's a sad
story.
It is. We all have these stories that we tell ourselves, and when you begin to understand the story, if you can empathize with it and go, I had no idea that's what was going on inside of your head.
Yeah.
Or your heart or your gut.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look at the 9s, sometimes called the peacemaker or the mediator. 9s
or the good old boy.
The good Everybody loves
the
9s.
Nice guy.
The nice guys. And for 9s, part of the reason why they're they're called peacemakers or the mediator, comes actually to the sin they can fall into. And again, much like the word lust, the word sloth or laziness doesn't mean what you think it means.
I was going to say, because I'm definitely thinking of this furry animal on a branch. So
Who's got moss growing on him
Yeah.
because it's like, whoa, yeah.
Yeah.
And the sloth is the kind of the King James version or lethargy, whatever you want to call it. But it's not laziness in the sense that they don't do things.
Yeah.
Because all people can be lazy.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
For them, it's more that they fall asleep to their own thoughts and opinions or desires. And they actually fall asleep to their anger. I'm not angry. I'm not angry.
I was going to say, because 8, 9, and 1 are all angry.
Yeah.
But then 9s are, if the 8 has this connotation of being a bully, the 9 has this connotation of being the nice guy. But still both with that undertow of anger.
And so we have some friends, mutual friends that are 9. We have several 9s in our life. Who
Yep.
I love my 9s just like I love my
Yep.
8s. And a 9, you're like, do you ever get angry? You'll know when a 9 gets angry.
You will know when a 9 gets angry, that is for sure.
But they fall asleep. They fall asleep to their own thoughts and desires and opinions. And so in order to not rock the boat, which comes to what they avoid conflict and confrontation. And so they'll set aside their anger. They'll deny their anger. They'll fall asleep to it because they don't want conflict. And that kind of goes back to the story. The story that revealed their personality is that they may have been in a home where there was conflict or they perceived it, and they thought it was their job to kind of keep the boat from rocking.
I think that they perceived it. That's really important. Because when we're talking about the story, or sometimes it's referred to as the childhood wound.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't mean that that the home life was necessarily bad. This is all a perception. Right? We all have our own lens, our own worldview that everything passes through.
Yeah.
And this is the story and the lie that we've built for ourselves.
And it reveals our personality.
Yep.
Because that's why you can have several people in the same family, but different personalities, and they experience similar lives, but one was a 9, another one was a 4, another one's a 3. And it's because it reveals the personality that God gave them. And so in their desire to have peace, they fall asleep to their own voice.
Yeah.
And so a 9, you'll sometimes, what do you want for dinner? I don't care. What do you want? And often they actually mean it because they may like all food.
Yeah.
But sometimes they do it because they don't want to bring conflict into the relationship.
Like, what if they wanted Chinese and I say Italian?
Yeah, so they'll just go, okay, that's fine. And that comes to the pitfall, what they call falling asleep or self-narcotizing.
I was going to say, I wouldn't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah, self-narcotizing. and so what 9s do in order to fall asleep to themselves is they'll remove themselves from the conflict and they'll find something that just kind of gives them peace. So maybe it's reading a book or it's alone time. It could be a hobby. It could be merging with other people's opinions. And so 9s often will merge. That's so if we're in a relationship, right? And if I'm a 9, let's say you want to do something, I'll take on your opinion, even if that's not really mine. But then if you were to ask me mine, I wouldn't know it because I've actually merged with yours.
Oh.
I fell asleep.
That's the okay.
Yeah, and then when all of a sudden I discover my opinion or something happens, that's when the anger can seep up. Because there's only for so long that you can push that down, and eventually some stuff comes up, right?
For 9s, we said you'll know when they're angry because it almost kind of comes on as a surprise. If they have the tendency to fall asleep to themselves, is it also surprising to them when they do eventually erupt? Because you've used that language of a volcano.
Yeah, the volcano language I like just because I think it really aptly describes 9s and 8s and 1s.
Yep.
I don't know how to answer that. I guess I'd want to talk to a 9.
I was going to say, we're going to have to ask a 9.
Yeah, we'll have
Call
to ask a
Josh.
9. Yeah, let's call up Josh or John or Alex
Steven
or
or
Steve.
Alex.
They're all
We do have a
guys.
lot of 9s.
Oh, Megan's a 9.
Megan's a 9.
Yeah. So for them, it's that falling asleep, but they'll self-narcotize in order to fall asleep. And so that's the pitfall, is when conflict happens or perceived pitfall, sometimes they'll even fake falling asleep. They'll act like they're taking a nap so they don't have to answer the question or they can get out of the conflict that's going on.
I've been so my brother, we've been talking Enneagram, and he's like, oh, maybe I'm a 2, maybe I'm a 9. It's gone back and forth on some stuff, and we were reading through probably the road back to you. Probably. And at one point, he's describing one of his children who, like, had pretended to fall asleep in the
Yeah,
in the
I
back.
think that's Ian Cronswick, yeah.
And all of a sudden, like, John and I, because he did that. He would do that. And one time, my mom and I all the stories about me today are going to be me in arguments with people. Well, we were arguing, and it was because something had happened with my brother, and so I was arguing, like, no, you can't do that to John, we fight. My mom ends up leaving, and my brother just goes, "Thank you." His eyes are completely asleep. He's asleep on the couch, and just, "Thank you."
That's really funny.
Really quick.
Yeah. Should I go back one?
Actually, no. Go ahead and do this one, then I'll ask the question.
Okay. So let's go to the virtues of the 9.
Yeah.
When 9s are actually operating from a place of security, and when they're at their best, they actually move into the 3. They move into action. Because 3s are action-oriented, right? And so what ends up happening there...
I wouldn't know.
They go from... you don't know what it's like to be a 3.
Not at all.
Peacemaking and peacekeeping are not the same thing. Peacekeeping is done through rules or avoidance, right? Whereas peacemaking is relational. And so 9s, they actually can get a lot of stuff done. I mean, the 9s I know are incredibly hardworking. That's why the language of laziness or sloth, we're like, I'm not lazy.
Yeah.
It's not talking about behavior, though some 9s are,
Yep.
just like some 7s are, or 6s, whatever. It's talking more about to themselves. It's getting to the underlying what you're pushing down. And so they actually move into action and peacemaking. They become great mediators.
Yeah.
Imagine if you have a rowing boat, right? Small rowing boat, and you've got several people on there. 9s, sometimes to keep the peace, will stand up and they'll try and balance the boat. Well, if they're not supposed to be doing that, they're the ones who are going to fall out. Because they weren't, it's not their responsibility to do that, but they carry that weight. But when they are called, or when they should do it, they become the grounding because they see everybody's perspective but their own.
Yeah, they're wildly insightful.
Very incredibly, and very funny.
Yeah,
Because they
crazy
see
funny.
so many different perspectives. Which then let's do the fruit of the Spirit. Fruit of the Spirit then is kindness, because 9s, they're just naturally gentle people because they want to make peace, and when they're functioning from a place of security in their identity in Christ, they bring the kindness of God into the world.
Yeah.
Just like the 8s bring the goodness of God into the world, each one brings something that God intended for them. Okay, you had a question.
Yeah, the first question actually comes from Danielle. What if your significant other is a 9, and at home is the only place the anger comes out because it's their safe place?
So what's the question?
That's the question.
Okay, so what if, I think that's normal.
Yeah.
Because wherever you feel safe, you tend to let your guard down more. And
unfortunately, the people that we take it out on the most are the people we love the most.
Yeah.
Because they're safe and we trust them. Whether or not that's right, that's kind of what we do.
Well, and that's the honor and the pain of love. Because the pain of love is that when truly somebody, I love them and they know I love them, they don't feel like they have to wear that mask.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they'll let it go. But what we have to make sure of is that they don't abuse that relationship. It doesn't become a dumping ground. A friend of mine once said, the danger for dumping grounds, if someone's always venting or directing their anger at you, picture them like a dumping ground. What do you bring to dumping grounds? Trash. Well, most people don't want to be treated like that.
I'm trash.
Yeah.
From Toy Story 4. I'm just going to bring up every Pixar movie.
Just do it. Well, as long as we don't have pictures, we don't have the royalties, right? We're good. And so what I would say is how the 9, and just like all numbers, the more self-aware they can become, they can ask the question, have I let my guard down to the point that now I'm causing harm?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because just because I feel safe doesn't mean that gives me the right to speak poorly to my spouse or to treat them bad, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something we all need to be reminded of, because when you feel safe, you feel like you can say things and do things that you normally wouldn't say or do,
Yep.
because you care typically about other people's opinions of you. Which one you think would matter the most would be your spouse.
Right. They're in.
They're already in. It's like when you're dating, you make sure you're all fit and trim, and then once you get married, you're like blah, 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 and eating all the foods because you're married, right?
Yeah.
It should be the reverse. And the same is true with the fruit of our spirits. The more that we feel safe, the more we should also want our spouses to feel safe.
Yeah.
But that's not a denial of, or that's not meaning that you have to be fake.
Yeah.
It means that you're self-aware and saying, am I actually loving and being what God has asked me to be for my spouse? Or my boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever.
Right on. Bring on the ones.
Bring on the ones. Wait, what happened here? Did I already skip that? Oh, I did. All right. We're a little out of order here. My apologies. All right, here we go. For the one, sometimes called the reformer or the perfectionist, also part of the anger triad.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and that's the hard thing about the naming of the number, is that everyone looks at the word perfectionist and they're like, oh, of course, I'm OCD, or like I have a high attention to detail, so I must be a 1. But that's not necessarily true, because it's all about motivation.
It's the motivation. And for the one, what ones are afraid of is not being good. So sometimes they're called the moral perfectionist or the moral reformer. And so depending on what type of one you are, some ones, all of the energy is directed at themselves. I'm not good enough. And so they're always trying to be better. They're always trying to be good, because that's what it looks like to be perfect.
Yeah.
And the reality is only God is perfect.
Yep.
And so what happens for them, their sin, actually, anger is the sin, but how the one presents anger is not like an 8 or not like a 9. It actually can come across as almost resentment. So sometimes they'll get angry because if you're not doing it right, ones will be like, why are you doing that? And that anger is directed towards you, or it's a reflection of themselves because they don't feel like they're doing right. And so ones can sometimes have this really harsh voice inside their head, basically, and this is where compassion is so helpful.
Yeah.
Imagine always in your head hearing, you're not good enough. You could have done
Constantly.
better. You could have done better. That would drive me nuts. That doesn't go through my head. And so for the what they're looking for, the avoidance of the one, is they actually want to avoid anger because, well, guess what? Being angry isn't good. Being angry isn't good.
No.
So the very thing they want to avoid is the sin they fall into, and so they can spiral. And so for them, it's they avoid not being good or being not good, not being good, being not good. And imagine for a moment you have this cyclical thing, right? I get angry when things don't go well, but what do I want to avoid?
Not being good.
Not being good,
Or
because
being not good.
being not good. That's what I avoid, because I don't want to be angry, and thus I become angry.
Oh no.
And so the ones have what's called the trap door. Out of all the numbers, the only one that does a trap door, where they put such a high standard on themselves that in order to alleviate it, they'll sometimes fall into the thing that they rage against the most. They'll do it behind closed doors, just to kind of protect, to let off the steam.
It's like in Friends, where Monica has that one closet where she shoves all of her stuff,
Yes.
and she like doesn't let Chandler in. Like, no, you can't do it.
Yes,
Yeah.
but she'll sneak in there every once in a while.
Yeah, has to put stuff in there.
That's right.
We had a question come in from Bianca. If you hear that voice, does that automatically make you a 1?
I want to be careful to say anything automatically makes you anything, because we are complex people. What I would get to is the motivation. So what is that voice telling you? How long has it been there? Has that voice always been there? And so the older you get, the more you begin to adopt other masks. That's pretty normal.
Yeah.
But the ones I know, I also hear it from 2s. I hear 1s and 2s and probably 3s. And actually, I think everybody has an inner voice, but theirs is, you're not good enough. You are not good enough. It could have been better. You could have been better. And I wonder, Ben, as a 3, do you hear that voice sometimes?
I do. What so like Stacy on our Worship and Creative Arts team, she is a 1 and I'm a 3. And so for me, it's I want to get this done, and I want to get it done well, so that it's successful. And so the struggle for her and I is, she's asked me, do you want it done or do you want it perfect? and we both laugh about it because, like, for me, being successful doesn't mean it was perfect. I might know the glaring errors of it,
Yeah.
But I've also learned that sometimes only I know the glaring errors of it. And and for me, usually when I will get upset about something like that is I have this list of goals, and I know that, like, if we were putting something out and I didn't obtain those goals, it wasn't successful, which isn't necessarily true. Yeah. But for Stacy, was it perfect? If there was
Her perceived understanding of perfection.
Correct.
That's right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I do have that inner voice, and we've talked about it sometimes because she's gone back and forth on, like, she's like, I hear so many things about threes, and I'm like, well, maybe I'm a 3. She's like, but then it's not about being successful. It's about the perfection.
And her particular type of 1, she's what's called a 1-to-1 1. It's like the Trinity, 1-to-1 1, or the sexual 1. Her 1, social and self-preservation ones, they'll focus on themselves. I'm not good enough, whereas the group's not good enough.
But the 1-to-1
is you're not good enough. They direct the energy. They actually rarely don't think they're good enough, which is why sometimes they'll come in and say, this is how it's going to be. You're not doing it right. And that's where the resentment can come in for some ones. Now let's talk about the virtue. The pitfall, sorry. The pitfall for the 1 can be hypersensitivity. And that hypersensitivity comes in is because the 1 in stress goes to the 4. And so they actually take on the sensitive nature of the 4, the low side of the 4, which they begin to romanticize their ideals about what is good or what perfection is. And when it's not, that sensitivity, that melancholy, that moodiness can come out, which is why they can come across as resentful.
Yeah.
Because they're drawing on that energy of the 4. And that's really the pitfall for them, because I don't know what's inside of a 1's head. And in their head, they're like, that's not right. I don't know that. And really what makes that right? Now, here's where I think we want to get to. This is where the thing messed up here real quick. There we go. The virtue of the 1 is serenity and peace. And that's the virtue that they bring is, imagine when everything is perfect, it's at peace.
Yeah.
It's different than goodness.
Yep.
There is absolute serenity. They don't feel the need to fix things, to make things better, to make themselves better. They're at peace with themselves and their environment. Which then brings us to the fruit of the Spirit for the 1.
Yeah, I've heard people say, like, no, like they're not necessarily any more patient than it. But if it goes back to you're not good enough, it could have been better, and you've got this spiraling inner dialogue, this argument with yourself, I think that lends itself to an extreme amount of patience.
Yeah.
And so even if they would come across as not patient, imagine if they weren't patient. You know, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and when the 1s go to security, they actually go to the 7, which is able just to enjoy things. They don't feel the need to fix them, to correct them. They're just at peace, and that gives them patience, and that's why they can be patient with others. One of the things that I appreciate about Stacy, who works with you, is when she is in that place, when she's in her sweet spot, she understands that you're figuring it out. Because she's the gospel for a 1 is only God is perfect. And when she's able to do that, if only God is perfect, then I can have patience in your imperfection, because guess what? I'm imperfect.
Yeah.
And I've watched when you guys do Powerhouse Theater, I've watched as she's giving some direction and the patience she has for these young actors. My daughter is one she wants to be an aspiring actress and singer, right? And watching that gentleness comes out, but that it comes out through patience when she recognizes they're in process.
Absolutely.
They're not going to do this perfectly. All right, let's look at the 2. 2s are in the heart triad, sometimes called the helper or the giver. And for the 2, the sin or the vice is pride. Now again, can any number struggle with pride? Yes, absolutely. Yep. I've struggled with it. Okay, this is a true story. When I was in high school, I'd been a Christian for like 3 years. And I went to my youth pastor and I said, hey, I think I got this Christian stuff figured out. I think I've got it down. Like, these are my exact words. I think I've arrived. I actually said those words.
Oh, no.
And not if you want to talk pride, right? I'm not a 2, though. And my youth pastor looked at me and goes, yeah, you're an idiot.
You completely missed the gospel.
You missed everything. And so it's, again, but the pride for the 2, because 2s find their identity and value, the story they learned is, I'm loved for what I give. Not for what I do, but what I give.
Yeah.
They won't let people help them. And that's where the pride comes in. Oh, I can help you, but you can't help me. I won't share myself. Which brings us to the avoidance. They avoid interdependence. So the lie that the 2 has believed is that they're there to give themselves to everybody else, but nobody can give to them, especially when they're walking in unhealth. And so they move to this place of codependence, to where their identity is fixated on their ability to help you. And which ultimately why they avoid interdependence, because interdependence is we're helping each other. And that it's not about what you give me, it's about the relationship. And so that the story that the 2 is buying into is, I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you. I can give, and give, but they'll avoid their own needs.
Yeah.
And I've watched that. My wife is a 2. And I've watched as my wife has done things where she'll give and give and give and give and give. But here's the thing. They still expect something in return. They just never say it. And if they don't feel appreciated, 2s will actually move into their 8, and they can become bitter and angry. And they can actually go into the scheming or the making plans, justifying things, right? And this is the pitfall. And again, the pitfall sounds interesting. What does that mean by flattery? Well, they're actually flattering you because they think you need the praise. So they'll say things in order to get your affection, because that's really what they want. They really do want to be seen as something more than just somebody who gives. Yeah. And so they'll find sneaky ways to get that payback, to get that sense of value. They'll flatter you in the hopes that maybe you'll say something back to them, instead of just being honest.
Yeah.
I think Ian Cron says, "No, hell hath no fury like an underappreciated 2."
Well, my brother, when he was going back and forth on stuff, he's like, oh, I think I might be a 2. And I said, if that's really true, then I've starved you. Like, I'm so sorry. And it's not. So like, but it was one of those where like, that's the first thing I wanted to say was, I'm so sorry, because then maybe you misunderstand what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the virtue for the 2 then is humility. It's that ability to recognize that you have needs. And so if you're a 2, one of the ways you can tell a 2 is they'll say, I don't have needs. They've actually denied their needs because they're afraid if they come across as that they have needs, then they'll need you. But I'm here to give. I'm not here to receive.
There is the counter type 2, though.
Yes. Counter type 2s actually will manipulate and get you to do their needs by pretending like they're more innocent than they are, or childlikeness. And they'll act, and childish not in the sense of acting like a baby or acting immature, but almost like I can't do that. Can you do that for me?
Yeah.
And especially when they feel safe. So my wife and I have had this conversation, and I feel safe talking about it because we've talked about it in other public settings. Sure. When we were first married, my wife would always look out for everybody else's needs. I never shared mine, which actually goes back to when we get to 7, we'll talk about that. But there was one night, I was dead asleep. I mean, like I was sawing logs, right? She comes walking in, she shakes me and says, hey, can you go get me a glass of water? I was like, what? She's like, well, can you get me? I was asleep. You were like, she actually just came from the kitchen. That was the funniest part. She's like, well, I don't want to get it. And I was like, no, get your own water. Get your own. Right? And that's, so when a 2 feels safe, or depending on if they're a counter type 2, they may actually act childlike. Oh, I can't do this. I need you to do this for me. But what are they actually doing? They're serving you by making you feel needed.
Oh, okay.
So they're actually still giving.
Yep.
I'm acting like I can't do it because it makes you feel, it gives you purpose, strong.
Or provider. Or,
yes.
Yeah.
The counter type 2 is sometimes called the princess or prince number. I can't do it on my own. I need my butler to do it, right?
Yes,
all right.
Jeeves.
So let's go to man, I got all jacked up on here. Let's go to, we did the virtue already. Yeah, fruit of the Spirit. Fruit of the Spirit of the two is faithfulness. And what they're faithful to is not only are they serving, but they're serving from the right place. And they are faithful. They are faithful servants. Think about when we die, we want to stand before Jesus and hear him say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And twos, they actually are meant to embody what its service looks like from the right place. So twos don't always serve from a bad place. Often they'll serve from a complete place of love because they truly do love you and want you. They want to serve you. But they need to make sure they don't forget themselves in the process or find their identity in their service. All right, let's look at the three, the performer or the achiever. Rock on! Oh, three. And this would be a great point because I'm not a three, and since you are a three.
Not yet.
I'm not a three yet.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll happen. That's not how it works, but that's okay. So three is sometimes called the performer achievers. They actually fall asleep to their own sense of, they fall asleep to the sadness because it doesn't look good to be sad or to have shame. And so this comes into what their sin is, which is deceit.
And people, when they read deceit for threes, are like, all the threes are lying to me, which isn't true.
No.
Well, I can't say. Some threes might be lying to you. But when it's talking about deceit, it's deceiving ourselves.
Yeah.
It's this idea that you put on so many masks as you walk through a room that by the end of the room, you don't know which mask is actually your face.
Yeah. Well, and it's the story the three believed is,
Yeah.
I was loved because I achieved, or I was loved because of what I did. Not what I gave,
Yeah.
what I did. And so that's what they understood. Now, maybe they lived in a home where that was taught, but I know a lot of threes who were raised in very loving, accepting, but that's the story they perceived.
Correct. I do remember at one point my mom said, even if you don't have anything, you have your reputation.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm like, well, cool, then I'm going to have an awesome reputation.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't know if I'm going to have all this other stuff. So yeah, like going through a room and whatever, I'm going to make sure y'all like me.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, like, I think for eights, they have this ability to walk into a room and size everyone up and know, like, who's the most powerful in the room. I think for a three, when a three walks into the room, they go through and they're like, I know who I need to be for everyone in this room.
Yeah. They become chameleons.
Exactly, and that's the deceit is, but it's a lying to yourself.
Yeah. And threes, when they're unhealthy in stress, may actually lie about their level of accomplishments because they're trying to appear successful. But guess what? Other numbers do that too.
Oh, yeah.
For the three, it just comes from a place of motivation because what the sin and sadness, the shame for the three, is they actually want to be loved for more than what they do. They want to be truly loved for just who they are, but that's the belief is, well, you won't actually love me for who I am. So I need to be this for you so that you'll love me.
Yeah, you want to break a three, say, I love you for who you are, not what you do.
Yeah,
That'll break them.
Every time. And this is what they avoid is failure, or, depending on the type of three, they avoid looking bad.
Yep.
Because it's depending on what it is. There's actually one type of three where they'll purposely look like they don't care what they look like.
That's the counter type three. Usually, like if they're female, they won't wear makeup. They'll purposely wear like clothes that are like mismatched or whatever. And the whole idea is, look how much I don't care how I look.
See how little I care.
I need you to see how much I don't care how I look.
And acknowledge.
And acknowledge it.
Acknowledge it.
Which is caring what people think, right?
So now the pitfall for the three can be vanity. Now sometimes that can be outward appearance, but it's more of that sense of that image management that I'm not going to let people really see me. Because if you see me, you may not like me. And so I'm going to project an image.
Because I don't like
That's
me.
right.
Yeah.
And that's, again, let's talk about the compassion. How heartbreaking is that? So if you know somebody who's a three, recognize that's what they're struggling with.
Yeah.
That's where their heartache, that's the deepest longing in them is for somebody to say, I love you for you. You don't have to be any of that. But even then, they still will struggle to believe it. Now, when the virtue of the three is truthfulness, and the truthfulness is the truth of themselves.
Correct.
And also being, you and I just had something yesterday. We don't need to go into the details,
Yeah.
but we had a situation yesterday where you actually said, hey, I didn't appreciate that you said this.
Yep.
Whereas if you didn't feel safe, you might have just kept it to yourself.
I would have.
And
I would have, and then I would have gone to the 9, and then I would have just shoved it down and been mad at you, and you wouldn't have known.
And I wouldn't have known because it doesn't look good.
Yep.
But because you felt safe, you're able to say, hey, I appreciate if you wouldn't say this thing anymore.
Yeah.
And my response is, thanks for letting me know. I appreciate your honesty. Because when the virtue of the 3 is, 3s are able to be truthful about their own needs. Mm-hmm. And really even acknowledging like, hey, when you say that, that hurts me because it gets to something deeper.
Yeah.
Which then leads us to the fruit of the Spirit, which is gentleness. Because 3s are afraid of failure, they are so gentle when other people fail because they know what it's like to fail. And so when they see somebody else, all of a sudden, all that empathy comes in and be like, dude, it's okay. We all fail. But that's the message they need to tell themselves.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So like on our teams and stuff, I've had people like in Z Youth, singers afterwards that feel like they did a bad job and just broken, right? And like actual tears. And yeah, that's interesting because like my first thing is just like, hey, it's okay. I can't tell you how many times I've screwed this up. Okay. Yeah. And then we move on and we get better. We learn from this and we get better for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's fun.
It's all right. So let's go from the 3 to the 4. Now there are, it's been said, now I have no statistical data on this, but it's been said that there are fewer 4s than any other number. But here's why I think why this might be, is that 4s long to be individual or different. So they're like, I'm not a 4. So I wonder if all these people who talk about how unique they are, how they couldn't be a 4, actually shows their 4-ness. I don't know.
Yep.
But they're the romantic individualist. And what they're longing for, and this is the sin of the 4, is they move into envy. They're actually envious that you seem to know your place and they don't know theirs. They long to find a home in themselves. And there's this weird word that I actually had to do some research on it because even when I read the definition, it didn't make any sense. Equanimity. It's a weird word. We don't use it. But the idea is...
Maybe you don't.
I don't use it, yeah. But they want to be at balance with themselves. They want their outside to match their inside. And what it comes from is they look around and they're like, it seems like everybody else is happy. If I could just be that. But then they're also like, but I'm special, I'm unique. Because the story they heard was, you really aren't that special. You're not that unique. Now, there's a beauty in that. Why do we need to be unique? But when somebody feels like they're not valued, that they don't bring something unique to the world, because every person brings something unique to the world. But they've actually, that envy kicks in, along with sadness and shame. The avoidance is they avoid ordinariness. So to prove that they are different than other people, that they add value, they want to make sure that they're not ordinary. Now, sometimes that'll be in how they dress. It'll be in their music. It'll work itself out in all kinds of different ways. When I first was kind of delving into the Enneagram, I thought this was like high artsy people. So
yeah, well,
Punky Brewster, right? Wearing mixed matched clothes.
Absolutely. I was just thinking that because it's like, oh, what are you doing? You're wearing a weird hat. You're doing all this. But then I was talking to another 3 who dresses kind of like what you would normally attribute to like the bohemian, is sometimes known as the 4. Like, and it was because of the occupation she was seeking.
Yeah.
And
the image management.
Exactly.
I want to look like that profession.
That's what they look like. I'm going to look like that.
Yeah.
So it's all about motivation. It's really easy to look at behavior, the way people dress, mannerisms. It's all about motivation and the story we tell ourselves.
And so they might tell themselves inside, I'm not like anybody else. And it might be the books they read. It might be their dress. It might be, yes, they can be very artistic because they tend to be really in touch with their emotional side. In the longing of that, and here's the pitfall, sometimes 4s will love the melancholy because the melancholy, you just don't understand what I feel. If you only knew what I felt. And they'll actually create the emotion, or they'll intermerge, they'll move into, to basically, they'll take on your feelings as if they're their own in order to feel, because feeling makes them feel different. It gives them definition.
Yeah.
And 4s bring beauty into the world, but that's the pitfall for the 4s. Sometimes they'll seek melancholy in an attempt to prove that they're not like other people. Now, there's another type of 4. It's one of the subtypes that what they'll do is they'll carry that melancholy, that heartache, but they'll bury it so nobody sees it. It's my burden to bear, so to speak. The virtue of the 4 is they actually are calm. And a picture of 4, like when they're struggling with ordinariness, they're constantly trying to prove that they're different from other people.
Yeah.
But when they feel secure, they actually realize, first of all, I don't need to be unique, which is part of the beauty is that we actually all are. So instead of seeking it, they've accepted that they're children of God, that they are made in the image of God, and that they bring exactly what God intended for them in the world. And so they no longer have to seek after the emotion or seek the difference, the thing that makes them different. They're just calm. They're equanimous, that's the word, right? They're inside and outside match. Which brings us to the fruit of the Spirit. And this is why when 4s are at their best, they bring so much joy because they are truly secure in themselves. And thus they also bring out the best in you. Because the more they feel like they're special, the more they make you feel special in the process. So instead of moving,
beautiful.
That's beauty. Instead of moving into envy, I wish I had. I think it's so awesome that you have that. Oh, I want to celebrate that with you. And they bring joy to everybody around them.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's go to the 5.
All right.
5's,
let's get to those thinkers.
The thinkers. Oh, this is the I struggle with. I'm in the head triad, so I'm a 7. At least right now, I think I'm a 7. That could change, but I think I'm a 7.
Yep.
5s are sometimes called observers or investigators. They are very internalized. And the sin of the 5 is avarice or greed or stinginess. But it's not greed or stinginess with their stuff, though that could be, but anybody could be that.
Absolutely.
It's actually, check this out, it comes out of a fear of depletion and looking foolish, so they move into emotional stinginess. So they don't share their feelings because they're afraid if they share their feelings, they'll be depleted. So they're sometimes called the castles. They'll guard themselves. They'll guard what they know, and all of that they do in order to protect themselves because they're afraid of depletion or looking foolish, which comes to the pitfall. Emotional stinginess.
Yeah.
So if you're married to a 5, if you're in a relationship with a 5, sometimes you might feel like the 5's never sharing what's going on inside of them. Part of it is there's some fear because they're part of the head triad, which is where fear comes in. And so they hoard, they become greedy with their emotions because they're afraid if they let it out, they may never get back what was given. And so for 5s, the lie that they were told is somewhere along the way, they ended up having to care for somebody who should have been a caregiver.
Oh.
That's the lie they believed. That they had to give, so that person took from them, and they never got it back, and so now they have to protect that. They're always afraid of losing that sense of safety and security, but more importantly, the emotional protection. When that happens in relationship, and this is where the pitfall is, if you're a 5, those around you, they need to know your emotions. Now, there's a subtype, the countertype 5, who will actually share all of their emotions with one person. It's their
person.
That's their person. And they're like, that doesn't mean 5s aren't fun. It doesn't mean they're not funny. It doesn't mean they don't have relationships. It means they're always a little guarded. Sometimes, more often than not, the 5s I know are very quiet people. They're very introverted by nature.
Yeah.
But that's not all 5s.
Sure.
5s tend to make great engineers. But again, not always. I know engineers who aren't 5.
Yep.
The virtue of the 5 is non-attachment. And this is something that for me, I have to lean on, as do other numbers. They actually don't get attached to stuff very often. Stuff is just stuff. And when they're actually walking in the virtue of their personality, they don't look at this computer. This computer is just that. There's nothing more to it. But they also don't get attached to feelings.
Sure. Okay.
And so now all of a sudden they're able to love, which brings us to the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit for the 5, which is so weird. The first time I saw it, I was like, well, wouldn't that be like the 2 or the 9?
Yeah.
But the reason why it's the fruit of the Spirit of the 5 is love is because they hoard, or because the greed, the opposite of that is hoarding their emotions. When a 5 is in a secure place and they're operating at their best the way Jesus intended them to, they love and they let themselves be loved. They invite people in to love them. They let people inside the castle.
Yeah.
And there's a beauty to that. And they love so well because they're not attached to things that often other people are. but it's that fear that's always keeping them from that fear of depletion.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the sixes. I love my sixes. It is said that there are more sixes in the world, at least in the United States. I don't know about the rest of the world, than any other number. And isn't it funny, when we've done our Enneagram events, we had 1-4. We had 1-4, and I think we had like 7.
Which was awesome for the 4.
It was I'm an individual. Yes, I am. And then they were like, but I feel so alone. But then there was a bunch of 6s and a bunch of 9s. And 6s, there tend to be more 6s. And they are what's called the loyal skeptic or the advocate or the devil's advocate at time and again. They're in the fear triad. And guess what their sin is?
Fear.
The very thing that they're afraid of is what their sin is. Just like with the 1, it's anger. They don't want to be angry, which makes them angry, that they're angry. The sin of the 6 is they actually live in the fear. Phobia is very there, except for the counterphobic 6. And so they live in that fear, which perpetuates fear.
Yeah.
So they're always looking for what could go wrong. I was at an event last year, actually right around this time. I was at Luminous with Ian Cron and Beatrice Chestnut. And we were having some conversations about 6s, and we broke into tables, discussions. And this one woman was sharing about what it was like to be a 6 and how she just saw problems. She saw danger everywhere. And she's like, when I go to the airport, I see everything's a threat, everything's a threat. And this other woman's like, I don't think I'm a 6. Because, I see the danger, but I'm like, bring it on. And that's called the counterphobic 6, because what the counterphobic 6 does, they want to prove they're not afraid.
Yeah.
Which, for them, what they'll lean into is they both want to avoid lawlessness, but the counterphobic one will actually break the rules to show that they're not afraid of the rules.
Okay.
So it's still lawlessness.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And then check this out. The pitfall, it goes either way. If you're a phobic 6, you're going to move into cowardice. So you're afraid to make decisions. Mm-hmm. And why is that? Well,
you spend your time in the what ifs.
it's all in the what ifs.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes. And for 6s, they'll create stories in their head, and those stories will keep them from action, or they'll go, I'm going to prove that story doesn't control me. And so sometimes they'll move into reckless behavior.
So I'm going to go skydiving.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm going to show how foolish it is to be afraid of skydiving, so I'm going to go skydiving, which is awesome, fun, but the motivation from it is actually out of fear. It actually shows their fear. So I'm not afraid. The fact that you're talking about how not afraid you are, what's the Shakespeare? Thou doth protesteth too much.
Yeah. Methinks.
Methinks thou doth protesteth too much. So the pitfall for the 6 is sometimes they'll get paralyzed in what could go wrong in creating stories and narratives and looking for the traps, that they move to paralysis.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, if you're a counterphobic 6, you'll actually prove that you're not afraid by putting yourself sometimes in reckless behavior, reckless positions, or in defiance of authority to prove that you're not afraid of anybody. The virtue of the 6 is courage. Yeah. You did a much better lion from the Wizard of Oz.
Muskrat guard his musk? Courage.
So the virtue, when 6s are operating at their best, they are very courageous people. So again, we want to be careful not to stereotype and go, oh, all 6s are terrified. No, in their head, they might have lots of fear going on. But I know 6s who they have all this fear in their head, and yet they still choose to do things. Not because they're counterphobic, but because they realize they can't live that way. And often 6s, they're worst case thinkers, which prepares them for the worst case scenario. A couple weeks ago, I had my friends, the twins, on, who were both 6s, and someone asked the question of, what does a 6 do for a zombie apocalypse?
It's like, I already got my bunker.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding? I've had these plans. They're alphabetized. Like, we're good.
He's got stock, lock, and barrel. Everything's ready to go.
What caused the outbreak? This one. Okay, great.
Yeah, and so 6s, they actually can move into courage when they realize that just because they told themselves a story doesn't mean it's a true story.
In the same way that 1s are gonna be the patient ones, 6s, I think, are the bravest number.
Yes, I would agree.
If the story they are telling is one of just this deep-seated fear, the fact that a 6 would do anything is just a remarkable amount of bravery.
Yeah. Some acquaintances of mine and friends, they have a brand called Kick Fear in the Face. And if the whole thing is like, there are a lot of people, and I haven't had a conversation with the person who started it, but I'm curious if she's a 6.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of that, like, fear controls us so much. And 6s, when they are doing what God has called them to do, they are a reminder of courage.
Yeah.
And often we'll think 8s are courageous. No, 8's just being an 8. It does. In their mind, they're like, that's not courage. That's just me saying that's what I got to do. A 6 is, they've got to work through all the stories and the narratives to get to that point.
To do this.
Yeah, even when it means that it could do something harmful or that it goes against everything inside of them.
Yeah, when you've got this file system in your brain of all of the what ifs.
Yeah.
And you still choose to do it.
And I actually, a lot of ways, I feel a deep connection with 6s because there's a lot of thing in the behavior of the 6s that I do. 6s will often look for security through other people, which is why they're so loyal. But in the process of that, they'll repress their fear, they'll deny the fear, which actually lends to them letting it control them. So for the virtue of the 6, it's courage, and the fruit of the Spirit is peace. 6 words, they're there. The fruit of the Spirit for the 6 is peace, because when they actually act out, they create peace because they are looking out for you. 6s sometimes are called wet blankets because people are like, why do you always got to talk about what could go wrong?
Yeah.
It's because the 6 wants the best for you, and they want you to be aware of all possible scenarios because in their mind, they're in the head triad. Their mind has already thought up 30 scenarios in the time you asked a question. Now, whether or not they've articulated it or not, or could, the mind's already going there.
Yeah.
And they're not really trying to be wet blankets. They want to protect you. They want to bring peace.
I heard it described once that don't think of it as like a wet blanket that puts out the fire. Think of it like when you're bowling and they're the bumpers. They want to make sure you hit the pins, and they want you to get a strike every time, right?
Yeah.
Like, so they put up the bumpers so you don't. They're the guardrails.
Yeah.
Which is a better way to think about it, right? Like they're advocating for you. Like, I love you. I think this is such a great thing. You should also know that there are landmines everywhere.
And what's helpful for 6s to know, when you put up, okay, let's use the bowling illustration, right?
Yeah.
If I've been bowling for 20 years and somebody puts up the bumpers,
oh, yeah. It feels like a slap in the face.
I'm going to be like, dude, I don't need the bumpers. No, you need me to protect you. And when 6s are at their best, they begin to realize, when is it helpful for me to share?
Yeah.
And that's part of that courage as well. Sometimes it's courageous to not share your thoughts. To be able to say, this isn't going to help them in this situation. That's wisdom and maturity. All right, let's go to the last one. So just like I said, 8s are like, why do you always start off with 8s first? As a 7, I hate the fact that 7s are last.
You put this together.
I know, I'm self-sacrificing here.
Yeah, look at you go.
7s are called the enthusiasts, the generalists, sometimes called the Peter Pans.
Yep.
They are part of the head triad as well, and they are rooted in fear. And they fall asleep to their fear, but in a different way. Their sin or vice is gluttony, and sometimes it's food, but it's the experience of food.
Sure.
So what the gluttony is not around food, it's around experiences. And they'll over-consume something, sometimes to the point that they're bloated in it and not realize it, but there's a reason for it, which is why it's so important that we talk about what they're avoiding.
Yeah.
What 7s are ultimately avoiding is pain and being trapped. Now, because I'm a 7, I can only talk about my experience. I try not to talk about other people's experiences as if I understand them. When I feel afraid, and there's the fear, when there's pain coming, my immediate response is, I need to get out of here. And there's the story that I believed, and it doesn't mean it's necessarily taught it, but it's the story I believed, is no one will ultimately take care of me, so I have to take care of me. No one will look out for my needs, so I need to take care of my needs. And so when something painful happens, I don't think you're actually going to protect me, so I have to protect myself. So what do? I go somewhere else. Sometimes it's mentally. It's so funny. There was a group conversation, and there was a conflict going on, and I didn't fall asleep like a 9 does. My mind just kind of checked out and started going to a different location. I started thinking about something else because I didn't want to be present because I felt trapped.
Sure. Like maybe you physically had to be there, but that doesn't mean you mentally had to be there.
That's right.
over here. I'm at the Bahamas.
But if my choice would be to physically get out of there as
Yeah.
well, and imagine a cat, and this is probably my favorite illustration about sevens. Imagine you have a yard and you have a cat. If a cat's in the yard and the gate is open, the cat's like, sweet, I'll just chill. But the minute you close the gate, that cat's like, peace, I'm out of here.
Yep.
Because for me, when I feel trapped or controlled, one, I don't trust that you're actually doing it because you care for me. It's all of a sudden my fear sensors go crazy. Danger Will Robinson, right? I mean, my head is just, I start building scenarios and I start thinking, oh my gosh, what's going on? But more importantly, I'll go into over there is better than here. Which leads to the pitfall. Oh my gosh, when you talk about it, how embarrassing it is to see the dark side.
Yeah, I don't like it.
The scheming is planning. It's not scheming in like, ooh, I'm going to build bridges behind stuff. I start making plans on how to get out. And I'll build, and what that comes from is when the 7 is in stress, I go to the 1. And I'm always thinking, right here isn't perfect, over there is. And so it's that fear of missing out. So in my head, I'll start making plans how to get out, how to protect myself. Because, and I still, my wife and I had a conversation around this. We've been married 18 years. It's going to be 19 years in January next year. I never shared my needs with her because I didn't think she ultimately cared. Which is funny because she's a 2. And that's what
she wants.
2s love to share needs. But I was like, I don't think you actually care. And so I never shared my needs. Well, when I started doing the work of the Enneagram, I realized that. So I started telling my wife my needs, and she's like, I don't know what to do with this.
I don't know what to do with this.
Because she's like, you never had needs, which is why she felt safe, because everybody else had needs but me. And now all of a sudden here I am sharing needs, and it's kind of throwing her for a loop. Because for me, it was the ultimate trust of saying, I trust you enough to share my needs. And here's the hard part. If you're a 7, you'll understand this. And I think it's helpful for those who aren't 7s to hear this. Because 7s are afraid of what's right here, I don't think people always appreciate how hard it is for 7s to stay in stuff. When things are hard and 7s don't escape, that's an act of will. Like it's painful. Much like, a 3 being able to be vulnerable with their failures or to say, hey, I did this. That's for the 7. It's to be able to stay in the midst of the pain is really tough. When the virtue of the 7 is sobriety, and the sobriety is recognizing that just because over there looks better than over here, it isn't.
Yeah.
Just because that cheeseburger is going to be a great escape doesn't mean it's actually healthy. And so sobriety is self-awareness, soberness about myself and my environment. I'm an emotional eater.
Is it like the just being okay to just be you?
Yeah. Well, no, not just be me, but to be okay.
Oh, okay.
To just be present, to not have to escape. And so like I'm an emotional eater, and I know most people are, but I used to think emotional eating was if you were sad, you ate chocolate cake. No, I have all kinds of emotions. I deny them. And you know how I deny them? By eating food.
Yeah.
And you know what goes really good with joy? Chocolate shake.
Sure does.
A chocolate shake goes amazing with joy. Every emotion has something. Well, when 7s are at their best, or when they're in security, let me rephrase that. When they're in security, they're not always at their best, but when they're in security, they actually go to the 5, they slow down, and they're able to say, I don't need to be attached to that thing. Remember what?
When they're in security.
When they're in security.
Okay.
When they, not insecure.
Yeah.
When they're in security.
Yeah.
When they feel safe, they're able to slow down and say, I can just be present. I don't need to fill that need or that fear. I don't need to run away. I can just be present, which leads to the fruit of the Spirit, self-control.
Sure.
7s are
Wow.
joy bombs.
Yeah.
They love bringing joy. They love new experiences. I love to do new things. I
Yeah.
do. What I've discovered is, as I've been working on myself, to be able to say, just because I want to do that doesn't mean I should do that or that I need to do that. And that self-control to recognize a want versus a need. I'm still working on it. Don't think I got it figured out.
Yeah.
So this is all 9 types.
Yep.
And there's so much more. And this is
There's so much more.
And this is why we're going to do these videos periodically,
Yeah.
where we're just going to take a subject. We went a little longer than we normally do because I wanted to get through all 9
Yep.
types. But we're going to, when we don't do interviews, we're going to talk about subtypes. And
Stances are fascinating. Subtypes and stances, I think, are probably some of the bigger stuff. It's really cool.
Stance has changed everything from my understanding of why people respond the way they do.
Yep.
All right, do we have time for a question? Were there any questions?
No, we don't have any questions right now.
So we rocked it.
Yeah.
So good that nobody had
kicked it.
questions, or they just turned off.
Yeah. Nope, they're still on.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for tuning in. Be on the lookout for season 2. And if you can do me a favor, we've actually converted this to a podcast.
Correct.
And so if you could go to iTunes or wherever you listen to.
Wherever you listen to podcasts, we are there. And if for some reason we're not, let us know and we'll get there.
Yeah. So if you can do me a favor, hit subscribe. And here's kind of what my goal is. I've had several people that have been like, dude, this has been so helpful.
Yep.
The interviews, I've had multiple conversations with individuals who've listened and said the different people you've had on have helped me understand myself or my spouse. But subscribe, share a comment, share it with a friend, get the word out.
Absolutely.
And we're going to have, I'm excited, we're going to have some really great guests on
Yep.
In our season 2, one of whom we actually just had on Theology on Tap.
Yeah.
On Tuesday night.
Yep.
Dr. Renee Diamond, she's going to be on next season. We've got a good friend of mine, Virgil Grant, who's going to be on, along with, so we're going to be doing some staff members and other people in our community. I'm excited for what lays ahead for season 2.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have an amazing weekend, and God bless.